Hey guys, I'm Justin. Welcome to Extension 18. Today we embark on a story of power and war, as we see a young Norseman fleeing from one threat to another, without realizing how close the real enemy actually is. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you like this content. And don't forget to click that notification bell for more future dark tales, just like this one. Torment of the Viking. Through a thick fog on dark waters, a hulking vessel began to emerge. Magna stood tall at the bow, searching for any sign of land. He glanced at his brother Thurston as the boat rocked against the jagged waves. He couldn't stop thinking back to when they had left home. His eyes slowly closed as he drifted back in time with his memory. Magna tried to save his mother and father from the murderous rival, but unfortunately, they were both slaughtered in cold blood before he could reach them. To Magna, family meant everything. Even though he couldn't save his parents, at least he could save his older brother Thurston and his younger sister Gerta. He found them both outside the village together hunting, completely oblivious to what just happened. Magna quickly broke the news about what happened to their mother and father and explained that the enemies were coming for them and they wouldn't be able to fight them all off. Gerta and Thurston looked behind Magna and can see the smoke from their burning village rising above the tree line. Without a moment's hesitation, they both started to charge towards the village, but Magna held them back. He was finally able to convince them to run. It was the only way to maintain survival. They gathered what belongings they could carry and ran to the waterside. Thurston was next in line to be king, but there was a rival in the midst that would not stand to see him take the throne. The rival's men caught up with them near the shoreline. They tried to stop all three of them, but together they were a force to be reckoned with. Between the loud battle cries and clashing metal, Magna could see two figures in the distance rushing in one after the other to aid the three in battle. Eric, a battle-hardened warrior who was also Magna's best friend since childhood, ran headfirst into the fight. Magna and Eric were inseparable. Although Magna's family did not want him to hang around with Eric, because they felt like he was a bad influence on Magna, Eric still stuck with him anyways. Then there was Ube, whose name lives up to the infamous Ube, son of Ragnar. He was Magna's first cousin and served as the personal guard to the king. Ube exclaimed that he had no idea what was going on and kept asking what happened to their parents. As the battle commenced, Ube said he was by the river fishing when he noticed the flames coming from the village. Magna moved swiftly behind Ube before an enemy brute could hit him and thrusted his sword through his temple. As he ripped his blade from the brute's skull, blood and thick brain matter covered the Vikings as they fought. Magna then yelled to Ube that their parents were dead, and he had failed at his job to protect them. Ube said that he was very sorry for letting them down and thanked Magna for saving him just then. He looked to the royal siblings as they battled and said that he would give his life to protect the remaining blood of his noble family. Thurston and Gerta didn't blame Ube for their parents' demise, but Magna did. Never had there been so much carnage at the end of their swords and edges of their axes. If they were ever close to Valhalla, it was definitely that day. As the brave young men held back the mob, Gerta pelted their enemies with flaming arrows at a short distance until they began to thin out, giving them an escape. Gerta pulled Magna to her side and whispered to him to go west, to the New Lands, a place called Vinland where grapes grow as far as the eye can see. She grabbed another arrow out of her quiver and pulled it tight between her bow. Immediately, she then turned to her companions and yelled at them to go before it's too late. Her brothers were not going to leave their dear sister alone, but as they approached her, they noticed that she had been wounded severely. There was no way she would survive the journey across the sea. Thurston knelt down beside his sister and grabbed her hand gently and said that this was all of his fault, that everyone was being killed because of him and royalty was not worth losing his family. Gerta led Thurston back to his feet, keeping his gaze as he rose up. She noted that she could save them with her death. Gerta nodded toward Magna and said confidently that Odin was calling his ravens to secure her place next to the gods. She then belted a fierce battle cry towards her burning village. Against her brother's instincts, They jumped into their boat as Thurston and Ube broke the water with their oars and shoved off into the open sea. As they drifted away from the only home they ever knew, they could see Goethe as she unloaded her fiery arrows towards the regrouped enemy forces until they finally overtook her. Magna's last memory of his sister slowly faded as the smell of crisp, clean air filled his lungs. This was it. Did they actually make it? It was a tough trip on their boat filled with endless ocean, but they had finally set foot on dry land again. Could this be the same place in the stories they had heard about for so long? As Magna scanned the shore, he could see his brother. He was running at breakneck speed back from his exploration. Magna leapt up in action and grabbed his Dane axe, fearing something was wrong. Natives. What looked like to be an indigenous tribe was chasing him in full force. The Vikings quickly formed a shield wall next to their docked boat. They were exhausted from the voyage, but they didn't see any harm in releasing some anger. The native warriors kept their distance though, which was pretty smart on their part. One very tall man moved through their crowd, pushing each man aside with his hands on their shoulders. He got closer than the rest as he raised his hand as one does to greet. The exhausted Vikings lowered their shields to reveal their faces. It seemed as if the natives wanted to show no ill will and befriend the weary Norsemen. Even though Thurston and Ube were reluctant to greet them, Magna assured them all that they needed food and water. Plus, it probably wouldn't be a great idea to attack them not knowing their exact numbers or where their village might be. As they followed them to their camp, Magna noticed that there were weirdly shaped objects built from twigs, twisting in the wind, dangling from the trees above. Eric stayed close to Magna, quietly whispering over his shoulder. He told Magna that he felt something wasn't right and that they shouldn't eat or drink anything that they haven't fetched for themselves. Magna continued to walk, ignoring Eric's advice. Eric was notorious for giving bad advice that normally led to fighting and bloodshed, but the farther they walked, the more insistent Eric became. He basically begged Magna to turn back, board the boat, and search for new land. It was unlike Magna to ignore his friend. He had always gone along with whatever Eric told him to do. He began to search his memory of the first time that he had met Eric. It was late in the day when he first saw the boy. He was working on mastering a battle axe, and he was doing it poorly. Magna's father had taught him all the weapons and how to properly use them, so he was inclined to teach his fellow Viking to do the same. Magna's father came back from pillaging a neighboring clan and saw his son practicing with a battle axe. He addressed Magna, asking him why he was practicing so late at night when they should be celebrating the conquered land. Magna explained that he was just showing his new friend Eric how to properly handle battle-ready weapons. At the sound of the other boy's name, Magna's father grunted. His face turned toward anger and his voice lowered. He told Magna he must never speak to this Eric again, and certainly never mention the name again. But being a small child, and a defiant one at that, Magna continued to be friends with Eric, and even went so far as to speak his name every chance that he got. Just then, a twig snapped in the distance, bringing Magna out of his memories. The closer they got to the camp, the stronger and louder the wind began to howl. There was a thick smell of rot in the air. Once they made it to camp, the Vikings noticed how overcrowded it was. Most of the natives had their bodies coated with a heavy dark red color, while the others slipped into their teepees as if they didn't want to be seen. The leaders of the indigenous tribes stood out for sure. Their faces were smeared in white paint resembling that of a skull. They invited the Vikings to eat and drink with them. Still on high alert, Magna looked at his brother and whispered to him, inquiring friend or foe. Thurston narrowed his brow and said, "Foe." The young men sat on an old log as they consumed the meal that was brought before them. The natives stared intently as they gobbled up their food. Ube tried to convey a humorous message about one of the natives eating too much, but was met with no understanding. As their meal commenced, Magna noticed Eric staring at him intensely. He had an uneasy look on his face. Eric wasn't eating or drinking for some reason. The night was closing in and the moon was peeking over the landscape as Magna reached for another cup of water. As he drank it, he noticed it didn't quite taste right. He looked towards his companions as his vision started to blur. Magna began floating in a field. It felt so peaceful there. His hands moved through the grass as he smelt the earth, reminding him of when he was a child running and playing with Thurston and Ube. Then Eric came into his view. He was trying to run away from a bright pulsating light until he was eventually engulfed by it. Eric screamed in agony as the light swallowed him whole. Within the light, he could see Goethe standing next to his mother and father in the distance. They were shouting and pointing at him. Magna didn't understand what was happening. This good dream was starting to turn sour. The closer he got to his family, the louder their voices became. He could finally make out what they were saying. They were begging for help. They kept saying, "Magna, please." He reached out to touch his sister's hand, but before he could, he noticed a horrible pain in his head. That's when he remembered sailing to the new land and the natives. They must have poisoned them. Magna shook himself awake, then looked down at his feet. He was tied up being dragged somewhere. There was the native that greeted them on the shore. He was dancing in front of a large campfire, chanting something sinister. Magna looked around only to see his brother and Ube tied to separate large posts. Where was Eric? As the full moon loomed in the sky, two natives raised Magna up and tied him to a large post. Magna tried to yell to Thurston and Ube, but their heads still sagged onto their chests. The ritualistic chanting grew louder and louder as the torches around them burned into the night. Magna could feel the cold wind getting stronger, blowing his blonde hair behind his head. He began to see if there was any way to get out of this, so he shifted his body weight back and forth just enough to loosen the post from the soil. The post began to bend until it finally unearthed. Magna landed hard on the ground, just missing the massive campfire. He was able to roll towards the flames, where he halfway burnt his bindings away, then used his brute strength to break the rope. The chanting natives that surrounded the three Norsemen in a circle didn't even try to stop Magna. They began to disappear into the shadows of the forest. The tall leader of the natives smiled as he backed away slowly and said, "Wendigo." With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Magna charged towards him in a blind rage, but the tall man was able to slip away in the darkness. Magna quickly changed direction towards his companions and began to free them. As Thurston and Magna were untying Ube alerted them that there was movement behind the torches. Thurston pulled one of the torches out of the ground as Magna continued to release Ube. Thurston cursed meeting the natives with peace and proclaimed that hostility was what they truly deserved. The beating of drums rang out in the distance. By this point, their hearts raced with fear and anticipation. Finally, Magna was able to free Ube. Thurston could see something moving closer beyond the blazing flames. He shouted at Ube and Magna to prepare for an attack. Magna squinted his eyes to see better in the dim openness as Ube signaled to him, pointing. Then he saw it. An enormous foul beast that would haunt all of Magna's dreams to come. Its head seemed to be a cow skull that was broken on the tip where the nose should be. The eyes were sunken pits of hollow blackness. Protruding from its head were elk antlers that reached up towards the sky. The intense horror continued as Magna's gaze drifted to its body. The monstrosity was literally floating above the ground. It had no legs to stand with. Its backbone was abnormally long. Its skin was pale white with a thin human-like torso. Magna watched as its spine dug into the earth as it dragged itself closer and closer. The drum beats were getting louder, thundering across the smoky breeze. The creature was slowly moving towards them. Everyone had a torch in hand but Ube. Right when Ube reached out to grab a torch, the thing somehow teleported behind him. Magna tried to warn him, but it was too late. As Ube turned around, a flame awoke in the beast's skull. White-hot fire shot out of its eye sockets. Before Ube could even think about evading, the creature of darkness opened its mouth and sank its razor-sharp teeth into Ube's scalp. With precision, it ripped his face off all the way to his jaw. Ube's body flailed like a fish out of water until the beast pounced on him and began tearing into his stomach. Magna and Thurston were Vikings and have seen some very gruesome acts, but nothing compared to this thing as it completely devoured Ube in seconds. The two remaining Norsemen sprung into action, realizing the fate of their companion and ultimately themselves. The creature lunged at Thurston, but he rolled in another direction, barely missing him. Magna went to strike with his torch, but it slapped him away with its right arm, sending him flying into one of the sacrificial poles. Although dazed, Magna searched for something he could use. In a panic and instinct, Magna reached in his satchel that the natives carelessly left on him. He felt a stone. It was his sunstone, used for navigating the sea on cloudy days. As the monster turned to him and towered above Magna's frame, it opened its jaw and let out a deafening roar in Magna's face. Remnants of ube splashed all over Magna. In pure fear, he threw the sunstone into the chasm of the beast's mouth. The creature then paused and retreated backwards. It then fell to the ground, raising its head to see Magna. The fire in its eyes started to light up just like when it killed Ube. Intense terror engulfed Magna, knowing he's done for, doomed to die. As soon as those words raced through Magna's mind, Thurston became its executioner with a thunder of a blow to the back of its head with a large tree branch. Its head shattered into hundreds of pieces. The fire inside of it dissipated into nothingness. Magna screamed in victory. As Thurston lent a hand to help his brother up, a black mist lifted behind him. It was seeping out of the fatal wound on the creature's body. As Thurston turned to look, the mist shot into his mouth and up his nose violently. The wind howled as Thurston appeared to be levitating off of the ground. Dirt, leaves, and broken twigs swirled around him as he floated in midair. The particles in the wind vortex were so extreme that it ripped his clothes and all of his hair from his body. His skin started to peel away in certain places, exposing his muscle tissue. Magna cried in horror, knowing that there was nothing he could do to help Thurston, just like he couldn't help Goethe or his parents. Magna felt powerless and questioned his existence. Family was everything to him, and now his whole family was gone. In his mind at that very moment, what was the point anymore? He stood up screaming for the mist to take him and not his brother. But by then it was already too late. The wind suddenly went eerily quiet, and Thurston's lifeless body collapsed. Magna fell to his knees in anguish. Madness and sorrow filled him to his very core. He prayed to Odin for an answer as to why all this had to happen. He soon realized that he was all alone, and all he could gain now was revenge for his family. As he began to stand, he looked on towards his brother's body, but it was gone. Magna could hear raspy breathing behind him. Was Thurston alive? Magna turned to see Thurston staring off into the darkness as the light of the campfire gleamed off of his pale white naked figure. He wanted to embrace Thurston, but something wasn't right. Magna crept closer to his brother with his arms stretched out. Before he could touch Thurston's shoulder, a voice in the distance said, "Do not go near him, Magna." A voice not heard since they were poisoned. It was Eric. Magna asked where he had been all this time and exclaimed that they really needed his help. Eric said he was here the whole time. Magna couldn't hold in his true feelings anymore towards Eric.
How could you just let us endure all that torture without lifting a finger? Where have you been? I had a vision of you running from my family. Did you have something to do with their death? Give me an answer now. I've lost everything. Eric, please.
Magna felt the unbridled rage building deep within as he spoke to Eric, while keeping his eyes fixed upon Thurston. Eric laughed quietly in the darkness and told Magna that he needed to really dig deep in his memory to find the truth. But Eric warned Magna that he might not be able to handle it. Magna snapped back at Eric furiously, wanting to know what he was talking about as Thurston's breathing started to become heavier and faster. Magna pleaded with Eric for help because Thurston could turn around any second and try to attack him. Magna began taking a few steps back from Thurston while telling Eric that he needed his help to subdue his brother, so maybe they could find a way to help him. Eric said that he couldn't help Magna anymore and that this would be the end of it all. Eric's voice was blaring all around him as he told Magna that he was with his parents the night that they were murdered, and that he assisted the rival in killing off the royal bloodline. Magna was completely enraged with pure hatred for Eric at this point. Eric's voice became almost deafening within Magna's head. As Magna pressed his hands upon his ears, Magna screamed for Eric to show himself. If there was anything else in this world that Magna truly desired besides bringing his family back, it was killing Eric in this moment. Eric's voice continued to echo through Magna's brain until it stopped almost instantly. A singular voice spoke in the distance as Magna regained his bearings. A figure steadily walked out of the shadows. Magna gasped in confusion and fear. He then ultimately realized what was going on now as he stared back at a mirror image of himself. Out of his own mind, he contemplated if Eric was just a figment of his imagination this whole time. His vision wavered as his memories came flooding back. His parents hunched over a fire, speaking softly, his mother's tears sizzling on the stones. Magna crept close enough to hear his father's voice, questioning where Magna had heard the name Eric. Had someone told him? Had someone broken their oath? The name Eric was never to be known by Magna. He was never to have known that he shared a womb with his dead twin brother, Eric. After that revelation, Magna had stopped mentioning Eric and had forgotten all about him. But he resurfaced when Thurston was presented with the honor of becoming the king upon the day of his father's passing. Magna had been secretly jealous of his brother, and so Eric returned. In Magna's family's eyes, Eric's spirit attached itself to Magna, leading him to bad decisions and self-torment. They didn't believe that Eric was evil. They just thought he was jealous that Magna got to live, and he didn't. Whether Eric was a spiteful spirit or just a figment of Magna's imagination, it was still a matter of concern. Magna was the rival this whole time that murdered his parents, and at length his entire family. Magna began to shake his head, forcing reality back into view. With every shake of his head and blink of his eyes, Eric disappeared, leaving him truly alone with the Wendigo. Magna cried in terror for Eric to come back, but he was gone for good this time. Thurston's reanimated corpse whipped around ploddingly to face Magna. With rapid speed, he threw Magna to the ground and held him in place. Magna did not fight back. He knew this was what he honestly merited. Thurston's eyes burned bright with the flame of the Wendigo as he raked Magna's insides into his cavernous cavity of a mouth. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this story. It had a nice little twist at the end. Do you think Eric's a figment of Magna's imagination, or is he a jealous spirit that tried to ruin Magna's life? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyways, thanks a bunch, and I'll see you again in the darkest depths of Extension 18.